short to save you some time. We'll be making 3 stops. We're going to stop up here, we're going to stop a little further down, and then our final stop is going to be towards the Innes house. In each of those stops, we're going to be discussing something a little different, but hopefully something that will still tie into a whole picture. So what I kind of want to talk about is misconceptions about the Battle of Fredericksburg. When people think about the Battle of Fredericksburg, they tend to look at it and see a very black and white image of Burnside was an idiot, the Confederates were invincible. I'm not expecting you to leave this talk with a completely different understanding, but I'm hoping that maybe you can look at things a little differently and have a little more context as to why some of these decisions were made. So at this first stop, we'll be discussing the political and military background to the Battle of Fredericksburg, along with Burnside crossing the river. At our second stop, we'll be discussing the Union perspective of the assaults on the stone wall on December the 13th. And on our final stop, we'll take a step back and we'll look at the Confederate perspective of the battle for just a little bit. And I'll try to shorten the stops, so this one should most likely end up being the longest, and then we'll make it progressively shorter as we spend some time walking through the sun. Alright, now this is going to be hard because it's really hot out, but imagine it's November. So it's November, it's gorgeous out, it's cold, the leaves are beautiful, it looks great. But it's November. The Battle of Antietam has just ended, just a few months ago. It was a big deal. Lincoln has signed the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't actually do anything yet, but it was a threat looming over the South that said, okay, you can come back now, but if you don't come back before January 1st, everything is going to change. This is no longer merely going to be a war about restoration of the Union. If you don't come back by then, this is going to be a war about emancipation. But Antietam, although it was close enough to a victory to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, it wasn't good enough to go all the way. Lincoln needs a big victory. Things haven't been going so great. In the West, it's been going okay, and Grant's having some success moving towards Vicksburg. But in the East, things have been pretty bad for a while. And the Union Army is just sitting there. They're not moving. McClellan's still the general. And I don't know how many folks have a Civil War background, but McClellan's pretty much known for not moving all that quickly. Lincoln's mad about it. Lincoln's upset that he didn't capitalize on any chances of victory at Antietam, and Lincoln's upset he's not moving now. So McClellan's gone. Lincoln's gonna go ahead and remove him again. And this is who they get instead. This is Ambrose Burnside. Very memorable mustache. I bring out this picture just because I know everybody loves this facial hair. I mean, you just don't see facial hair like this anymore. Or maybe there's a reason, I don't know. But he's coming in, but he doesn't want to. A lot of people come out of that film and walk up to me and say, you know, John, Burnside was an idiot. Why did he do this? Burnside's incompetent. The funny thing is that if you walked up to Burnside and said, you're incompetent, he'd probably agree with you. He didn't want this job. You're hearing a lot about Civil War generals who they're tooting their own horn. They're like, this is great, I'm great, this is gonna be awesome. Burnside has to be ordered to take command of the Army of the Potomac. He's offered it twice, and both times he goes, no, I don't want it. So then Lincoln writes another letter that basically says, I don't care. You're doing this. And he's still on the fence about it. The only reason he takes this is because he's told, okay, if you aren't going to take command, I'm going to give command to General Hooker. Burnside and Hooker hate each other. Hooker is the exact opposite of Burnside. Burnside, I don't want to say is humble, but he's very negative and down about himself. Very much a, you know, I don't think I can do this. Hooker is very much, I can do this, I'm the greatest. This is the best army ever, I'm the greatest general, this is going to be great. So Burnside looks at this and goes, okay, whatever you do, don't give him the job, I guess I'll do it. So he inherits the plan from McClellan. He's friends with McClellan. He thinks that McClellan's new plan for the campaign down to Fredericksburg, he thinks it looks pretty good. The plan relies on speed and surprise. The idea is that he's going to take his over 120,000 man army, and he's going to bring it down to Fredericksburg, and he's going to have pontoon bridges. And he's going to cross the river before Lee knows what's going on. And he's going to force Lee to fall back either to the North Anna River or all the way to Richmond. He thinks that he can pretty much just blitz past it. And it's not a bad idea. And when he sends that plan off to Lincoln, Lincoln says something along the lines of, I think it will work if executed quickly, which is kind of a backhanded comment that says, fine, but you can't be like McClellan. You got to actually do this, and you got to actually do it fast. And so Burnside gets on it. It's not that long after he's made commander in November that he books it down here as fast as he can, writing orders to Washington saying, okay, you guys need to send your pontoon boats down here. He gets down here on November 19th with over 100,000 men. On the other side of the river, there's maybe 1,500 Confederates. Lee freaks out. Lee leaves these men here to delay Burnside, and he books it back to the North Anna River with the rest of his army. But then what happens? Burnside's not crossing. The entire army is sitting there. So Lee takes a step back and he goes, okay, well, they're not moving. So now I can get back there. So this plan worked. Lee had to retreat closer to Richmond. Burnside had Fredericksburg, but he was on the wrong side of the river. There was a mix-up. The pontoon bridges were 10 days late. By the time they make it to Fredericksburg, Lee's got 70,000 men on the other side of the river. You know, that plan could have worked. It did work until they couldn't cross the river. And they sit around, and Burnside writes to Lincoln. He's like, this isn't going to work anymore. Lincoln says he doesn't care. Lincoln says that it still has to happen. He still needs a victory before January. So Burnside's weighing his options. He needs to decide where to cross the river. The problem is, if he goes north, the river splits in two. He'd have to cross 2 rivers to get to Lee's army. That's a disaster, because if you get your back caught against either of those rivers, it's going to be a mess. If you go further south, the river gets wider. That's more of a problem. So then he has to decide where to cross at Fredericksburg. And he decides to cross right in the middle. His explanation to Lincoln is, it would surprise General Lee there as much as anywhere, which is a really backhanded way of saying, listen, whatever I do, it's not going to be a surprise. I might as well just do this. And he's expecting Lincoln to veto the plan. Lincoln doesn't. Lincoln says, you have the pontoon boats now, do it. Burnside doesn't want to cross the river. He realizes that this is his only option, and it still sucks. But he doesn't have a choice. Is this battle Lincoln's fault, maybe? Now, on December 11th, they start to put the pontoon bridges down. Now, there's a lot of fog, so for a few hours, from about 3 to 5 a.m., it's working pretty well. The idea is to get these bridges across in early morning, rush across, be at Marye's Heights by early afternoon. That's not a bad plan either. In theory, the Confederates have been digging in, but if you could get enough people across quickly, it might still work. But in town, you got Barksdale's Mississippians. There's not a whole lot of them, but they're going to work awful hard at keeping these from getting set up. Just as a background, pontoon boats, they're basically a bunch of boats that you lash together and lay wood over, and now you got a bridge. So this is just kind of a nice visualization of what those look like. So Barksdale's Mississippians, they're right on the river. And they're looking at that bridge going up, and they're realizing that they have the job of delaying that army as much as possible. So they start taking shots at the engineers. The problem is that there are over 150 U.S. cannons all along Stafford Heights. So these Mississippians, they're not going to line up at the edge of the river and start shooting. They'll get blown to pieces. So they do something very unusual. It seems very common now, but it was a vastly new idea then. They start hiding in all the buildings on the riverfront. Now these engineers, they book it off the pontoon boats because they're standing in the middle of the river getting shot at, trying to work on the boats. And that's not what engineers are used to. Engineers are used to following the army and maybe throwing up something there. They're not used to being the people that go first. So they're writing letters back up to Burnside at Chatham, and they're going like, yeah, we're not doing this, we're done. So there was a big back and forth for a couple hours where the Union artillery would open up on the Confederates would stop shooting, The engineers would come out, lay down another boat, and then they'd get shot at again, so then they had to go back. Artillerists described this as trying to shoot a fly with a pistol. Because now, in the modern military, you look at a building and you say, okay, well, artillery from wherever could just completely blow it apart. But with these, sure, they've got a lot of guns, but just because they hit a house doesn't mean they hit the Confederate soldier inside the house. So this isn't working. It's now early afternoon. The pontoon bridge is half finished. They're supposed to be on the other side of town by now. So they try something else really unconventional. They conduct the United States' first riverine assault. They take a bunch of soldiers from the 7th Michigan who were voluntold to do it. Technically they volunteered, but who wants to volunteer for that job? They load them into boats. Now these pontoon boats, they're not very water dynamic. They're basically square. There's a couple set up over at Chatham if you make your way over there later. So they're in this thing trying to paddle across the river using the butts of their rifles. So you've got some soldiers paddling real hard like this. You got other ones paddling real hard like this. The boat starts spinning around and goes downriver. But enough of them do make it across the river and start fighting building to building and pushing the Mississippians back. They send a couple more regiments across by boat, and by then, with the other side of the river taken, they can finish the pontoon bridge and send more soldiers across. So now we've got something entirely different. We now have street to street, building to building fighting in an American city. An American city that has just been shelled for the last few hours by American soldiers. It's completely new, it's completely different. This street to street night fighting goes on for hours. Barksdale finally retreats in the evening. It's pitch black and there's been fighting in the city. He pulls back. He's delayed the Army of the Potomac for the better part of an entire day. He's done his job. Now some other pontoon bridges go up on other parts of the river, and the night of the 11th and the morning of the 12th, the rest of the Union Army crosses into Fredericksburg. And they're frustrated. They're angry because they know that they're going to have to fight in trench positions the next day. They're angry at the Confederates for trying new types of warfare out on them. They start to see the town and the buildings as their enemy. Because if you're trying to cross that river and your friend next to you gets shot and you can't shoot back because you can't tell what building shot at you, you're going to start seeing the buildings as the enemy. And so the Union soldiers ransack the town from the evening of the 11th all the way through the 12th. Now, officers will try to stop it. Not every soldier takes part in it. But a lot of other officers look at it a really dark way. They see it as either vengeance against the Confederacy for starting the war, or they see it as their soldiers blowing off steam after the stressful experiences of the previous day, or as a way to get preliminary release for the horrible things that they're going to have to order those soldiers to do the next day. So, buried in political pressure, Burnside has crossed the river to carry out a plan that he no longer thinks can succeed. And that's just the beginning. That's the 11th. We got 2 more days here. Now, if you follow me, we'll take a look at the 13th, because for the 12th, both armies are just consolidating and getting ready. But if you follow me to the next stop, we'll walk along the walkway. We'll avoid the parking lot in case anybody needs to back out. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them either at the map or on our way over. Have everybody use their imagination a little bit. So behind us, this is all restored pretty nicely. The problem is that behind you is a housing development. So instead of the wall of trees that's hiding fences and buildings, try to imagine a several mile long open clearing before you get to town. And that's what you're looking at. So Marye's Heights is behind us. You've got the Sunken Road and the stone wall and the heights behind it. And a few miles away, you got the rest of the Union Army preparing to walk up that big clearing. They got to cross a mill race, which is basically extra water drainage. And they got to cross a whole bunch of ditches to get up here. At 11 a.m. on December 13th, William French's division is the first to attempt the assault on the stone wall. Now, to the north and south of us, there are small rivers. The Army is blocked into a certain amount of space that can only fit about a brigade at a time. So he lines up his 3 brigades. The idea is that the 1st Brigade will go as far as they can, taking all the punishment, and when they can't take it anymore, they'll lie down. And the 2nd Brigade will pass them and take as many hits as they can, and then they'll lie down. And then the 3rd Brigade will hopefully get past them and get to the wall. It's basically macabre leapfrog up to the wall, brigade by brigade by brigade. The problem is the heights here. Generally, these assaults have succeeded. They've been very popular before. They've worked, being able to leapfrog so that you still had fresh troops when you got up to a wall. The problem is because of these heights. You got the front row of infantry behind the wall. They can only hit the front brigade. But the heights are lined with artillery. And that artillery can hit the 2nd Brigade and the 3rd Brigade. So by the time the 1st Brigade breaks and lies down, the 2nd Brigade, instead of having taken no hits, has already been torn to shreds by artillery. The 1st Division doesn't make it within 100 yards of the stone wall behind us until they're all lying down in ditches taking cover, having taken about 25% casualties and barely getting within range of the wall. So that assault's a pretty big failure, right? So why does Burnside order a 2nd, and a 3rd, and a 4th, and a 5th, and a 6th, and a 7th assault to do the exact same thing? Well, you have to take a look at his battle plan. This isn't supposed to be the main assault. They're not thinking that they're going to swarm over the wall and rout the entire Confederate Army. That's not the plan. This is supposed to be a diversionary attack. Further south of us, down Lee Drive and the driving trail, is Prospect Hill. That's supposed to be the main attack against Jackson's corps down there. Now, the 11 a.m. assault by French was supposed to keep everything on this side busy. Maybe draw troops away from the south, but at the bare minimum, keep troops from the north from going to the south. The problem is that to the south, General Franklin, the commander of the Grand Division in charge of carrying that field, he's confused. The orders got mixed up. He thinks that he's the diversionary assault. He's not putting his entire force into the attack. And that attack almost succeeded too. General Meade, he's important later, not at this battle, but in a future one. General Meade takes a very small force and accidentally stumbles into a huge gap in Jackson's line. Probably could have won the battle there if Franklin had actually bothered to send support. But Franklin thinks he's the diversion. And the generals up here think they're the diversion. So nothing actually gets done. The first few assaults up here are in order to allow the other side to break through. The problem is that to the south, they're not doing anything. So that's why these are looked at as useless. By the mid-afternoon, after the first 3 or 4 assaults, the idea changes. They're no longer attacking the wall to achieve breakthrough in the south. They're attacking the wall and throwing away lives to protect the rest of the army. You now have thousands of soldiers strewn across the field, wounded or just taking cover behind a ditch. And they're worried that Lee, who's a very offensive commander, as many of you know, they're worried that Lee's going to take his army, attack, capture everybody still left in the field, push the Union Army with its back against the river, and possibly destroy the entire thing. So the last 3 assaults on the stone wall are meant to be suicidal. They're throwing away these men in order to protect the rest of the army. They know that the attack to the south has failed. They're no longer worried about that. They know that they can't take the stone wall. All they can do is keep throwing people at it until dark. thinking that darkness would then allow for the removal of some wounded and for the Union Army to make it through the rest of the battle. We'll wrap up the battle here and then we'll take a backtrack at the next stop. So what pretty much happens is that these Union soldiers lay out on the field all night. The wounded are crying out for assistance, and the living are using the dead as shields because Confederates are shooting at them all night. To add insult to injury, the northern lights appear in the skies above the town. Extremely, extremely unusual to see them this far south. But there they are, right above the battlefield, as thousands of Union soldiers hide in a ditch, waiting for orders to withdraw. And they pretty much sit there for the majority of the 14th. Now, the evening comes, and the Union Army, now this is where Burnside really does succeed. He manages to sneak his entire army back across the river without Lee noticing. Because if Lee had noticed, he probably would have attacked them. If he had known that the entire army was withdrawing, and he could have captured hundreds of thousands, potentially. Could have destroyed the entire Army of the Potomac. So with Burnside having such political pressure at his back, and having needed to execute a plan when his commanders were misunderstanding their orders, but having been able to work with that and withdrawn his army without having it been destroyed, maybe he deserves a little more credit than we've been giving him. Now, if you follow me, we'll go into the Sunken Road and walk down along it and hunt for some shade for me to talk about the Confederate perspective. Now, we're going to pass a whole bunch of signs, and they're all very interesting, but I do ask that you stick with me until the end of the program. There'll be plenty of time to catch those at the end. I also ask that you stay away from the wall, not only for safety reasons, but also for preservation reasons. That section there was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s. The next two sections we'll be going by were rebuilt in the mid-2000s by a Scottish artisan. And I'll be sure to point out the final section all the way at the end that's still original from the Civil War. So help us to preserve our resources, stay safe, and stick with me. There'll be plenty of time for those signs at the end. If you have any questions, we'll walk and talk.
Is this a witness tree?
No, it's not. It's just a big tree.
Just a big one.
Talking mostly about Burnside and a little bit about the Union armies. There's a whole other army here that I haven't talked about yet. Now, the final big misconception that I want to talk about here is the idea that the Confederates are essentially invincible behind this stone wall. They had a rough go of it too. In fact, right behind you, that stone marker, is the marker to General Cobb. He was the commander of the Georgia Brigade that was tasked with defending this wall. And he gets hit with about a 1 in a million artillery shell. This thing is being lobbed from the other side of the river with a hand-cut timed fuse. And this shell goes through the building marked there, goes through the building, pops out on the other end, and detonates. That's a 1 in a million shot. He's carried off, and he dies of his wounds. Something that people don't always understand is that those 150 guns on the edge of Stafford Heights, they're shelling this the entire day. It's not doing a lot because this is pretty much maximum range for artillery, and like I said, they're cutting these fuses by hand. So if you cut 1 millimeter off, and you're a couple dozen yards off of where you want it to detonate. So they're shelling this. It's just not doing a whole lot. But it still sucks to be down here. So here's another photo of the stone wall, kind of showing you that there was the ditch behind it, either partially hand dug, partially worn down by years upon years of foot and wagon traffic. But as you can see, there's wounded here. The Confederates behind the wall take about 1,000 casualties, the majority of which, well, they're running up and down the heights to get reinforcements or to get more ammunition. Now, we'll go by the Innes house briefly, and I'll point out a few things. But this looks like a pretty good position, right? You got a stone wall, you got a sunken road, and you got a house in front of you. So how do you think the regiment right there is doing? You think they're doing pretty well? They take the highest casualties out of any Confederate unit on the wall. Why? The North Carolinians behind them can't aim their guns. There is extremely, extremely heavy friendly fire. at the stone wall, which we will be able to point out because there are a lot of bullets still lodged in that house over there. Now, the North Carolinians on the heights, they're not sure how to aim their guns. And the other problem is that when you got a big house in front of you, your eye's going to be naturally drawn to it. So they're not aiming over the house, they're not aiming to the side of the house, they're inadvertently aiming at the house. And they're inadvertently hitting hundreds of the people behind the wall by the house. Phillips Legion takes the highest casualties of any unit on the stone wall. It's pretty much entirely from friendly fire. They send runners up the hill repeatedly to the North Carolinians saying, okay, shoot to the side, shoot higher, or just stop shooting, because you're doing more harm than good here. The other thing to keep in mind is that they're pretty much piled on top of each other, just about 6 deep behind this wall. Now, some are standing in back, just loading and handing their rifles forward to the person in front. Other times, they'd go in ranks of 2, fire, swap, fire, swap. But irregardless, they're going through a lot of ammunition, and they're sending people up the hill to get more, and those people are generally getting shot because they're revealing themselves, because all the Union soldiers that are lying down on this downward slope, they're shooting. And who can they see? They can see the people running up the hill. And the other thing, now it doesn't compare to getting shot, but they're blowing out their shoulders. The average combat load is about 40 rounds. Some of these Confederates are firing upwards of over 100. Now, this leads to a couple guns breaking because they're just so filled with the crud that happens when you fire the gun. But even if you keep handing off guns, so you're only technically putting 20 rounds through a single gun, these guys basically bust up their shoulders real bad. Everybody's got a black and blue shoulder. A couple of them get dislocated. It's not the same as getting shot, but it still hurts real bad. So, it's pretty bad being behind the wall. It's pretty bad being in front of the wall. It's pretty bad being on the ridge behind the wall. It's pretty bad all around. Now, the Battle of Fredericksburg generally gets condensed into Burnside was an idiot, attack the wall, attack the wall, attack the wall. Now, hopefully my first stop helped explain why he crossed the river. Hopefully my second stop explained why he attacked the wall. And hopefully the third stop made you guys think a little harder about what's going on behind the wall. Now, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, if you follow me down, we'll go pester Julia over at the Innes house, and you can take a look at some of the friendly fire damage on this side of the house on the exterior and on the interior, where everybody's shooting through the house trying to hit who they're trying to hit. If there's anything you want to cover, I'd be more than happy to go over them. But otherwise, do keep in mind after we leave, if you go up that trail behind you, it's the continuation of the walking trail, and it'll loop you through the National Cemetery, which recently had our luminaria for Memorial Day. It was gorgeous. There are also all the signs that we passed on the way over. There is a driving tour down Lee Drive if you're interested in learning more about the Union assaults on Prospect Hill that could have won the battle, had Franklin understood that he was the main assault. There's Chatham on the other side of the river, which has an example of pontoon boats, is the example of a plantation home run by slavery, is an example of Southern living during the battle, is an example of a whole bunch of things. And that's open and staffed by the NPS. And if you looked at the maps that you got in the visitor center, we got 3 more battlefields for you to do driving tours at. And now that it's our summer season, there's staff at every location, every day. So other than that, I've probably taken up enough of your time, probably a little tired of me. If you want to look at any pictures in closer detail, if you want to ask me any questions, now's the time. Thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you.
Do you know why